the video here for a minute and think about, so what does this have to do with being a missional church? You know, what does this, entering this ancient world, entering this and hearing this ancient world and these ancient writers tell a story about Yahweh for the first time. Think about, this is origin stories. The world is rocking on and trying to figure out living in a world that they don't understand, and they don't have a word from Yahweh yet. They don't have Jesus Christ to show them. They're figuring out as they go, and boy, do they mess it up a lot. Man, it's just a world that's getting more and more messed up and screwed up because humanity has grabbed the key to the understanding good and evil and what to do with it and how to wisely live it. And they're just out there living their lives with that in their hand. You know, I can do this all by myself. And there is a Yahweh God who is working in the midst of that throughout all this. Right? We can't lose sight of that. It's being told in a different way, in a different language, in a different culture. I went back and reread this week. John Walton talks about it like it's a cultural river, and we have to enter into the cultural river of the ancient world. That's what we're doing in this class. That in our cultural river, there's lots of things like individualism and democracy, and they're just not in this cultural, they're not in this river. Those words would have been so weird, you know. If it was reversed and ancient people were here teaching Wednesday night Bible class. Now this word democracy, the best we can figure, you know, it's this. You know, it's what it sounds like. It comes from the ancient English, you know, and we don't know what it, you know, but best we can figure it's this. I know it's weird. I know it sounds weird that people would think they're individual. And that sounds so strange to us in our world. But think about it, you know, it would be the same thing. And here we are loving our ancient neighbors as ourselves and listening to them in their language and learning in their language. And Mackie's going to talk just a minute tonight, listen for it, on how kind of all this started. On how kind of all of these things had to be dug literally out of the ground. And there was a reason why 150 to 70 years ago that people started digging up in the ground these ancient cultures and began to understand language and begin to understand, you know, the way they thought and the way they looked at the world and the practices they had and those kinds of things. And lo and behold, they uncovered like the Babylonian flood story and the Sumerian flood story. I'm like, that sounds familiar. We've heard about that. And they begin to see some similarities in that story and similarity and differences in that story. And it made this story just kind of pop and say, yeah, there's some similarities to this ancient Sumerian story of a flood. And even more than that, tonight he's going to focus on, they begin to see similarities in the genealogy accounts of the ancient stories in other cultures. And this one, they both have a guy who kind of gets taken up into heaven. You know, we've heard of a guy like that. Well, they have a guy like that. I think his name's Irma Dunke or something. He's going to say it. I probably didn't say it right. Okay. But they had a guy like that. And so what's going on here? Yeah.
I was just studying with a guy yesterday, and we were talking about Noah. And I went to Josephus, the first century Jewish historian commissioned by Rome. And in his book of Antiquities, there's a section in there where he talks about Noah and the flood. And he names these other religions that have similar flood stories. But this is the account. And he quotes verbatim from Genesis. Josephus does. talks about how the name of one man from a nation, can't remember the name of the nation, but they actually were taking expeditions to Noah's Ark, and they were breaking off pieces of wood from it, and they were wearing them as amulets around their neck as good luck charms. So they knew where it was at.
Yeah.
And they would take trips there.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine those things. Yeah,
Right there.
2,000 years ago. Yeah. Anyway, so this is real interesting tonight, but here's the question. The question is not, can we walk away and go, oh, cool, you know? Similarities between ancient people, you know? But, so what does a church do with this? What do we do? Where do we go? How do we get on the God boat? You know, get on the God train and write it. What's God up to in all of this as the story's told? So anyway, let's watch this and then let's think about that a little bit tonight.
Let's go forward into chapter 5 proper then. The 10 generations from Adam to Noah, which is thus the name of the class, from Adam to Noah. Oh man, this chapter's so cool. I never thought it was cool until I really began to read Jewish commentators and use my concordance. We're given 10 generations from Adam to Noah. Copy and paste for everyone, except for 3. 3 get a little extra love, extra attention. There's a little narrative inserted in between Adam and Seth. There's a little narrative insert with Enoch, the 7th from Adam, and then there's a little narrative that we already read about Noah, which is when Lamech. So in other words, when you see a clear, this is just a good Bible study tool. When an author is leading you along a pattern and repetition, and then there's a break in the pattern, pretty obvious. One of these things is not like the other. That's the idea. So there's that. So we're going to take a moment to kind of register those. But the long ages of the patriarchs here have caught readers' attention for a long time. So I'm still processing this, but it is, you can't ignore this whole facet of what's going on. As we step into Genesis 5, notice that the author tells us the name of his source for the first time. He says, hey y'all, what follows is an excerpt from the scroll of the generations of Adam. He's telling you, I got this material from a scroll. And from this point on, from Genesis 5 to 11, we're going to trace a storyline that goes from the first Adam up to the generation of the flood. And there's these 10 long-lived, aged patriarchs. Then is going to come the flood, and one is going to be rescued through and out of the flood. And then that one will be deposited on the high place, and then that will itself lead in one way or another to the flourishing of the nations, but the chief of which is Babylon. That storyline right there is... I'm so tuned out of pop music right now. Whatever is like the most popular song right now, that storyline is that version. There was a tune, a top 10 tune in Mesopotamia that starts with the origins of kingship and humanity with the gods, the 10 generations, the flood, the survivor of the flood, being the multiplier of new nations, the chief of which is Babylon. This is like, people are singing this song. And what the author of Genesis 5 through 11 is he's going to do is he's going to tell a story that everyone would recognize, but at every turn, it's satire and parody on the Babylonian version of the story. And for a while, this bothered me. I think I understand it more now, and so I'm going to force you all to undergo in the next few minutes what's taking me a while to process, so I understand that. So I'm just going to point out a bunch of stuff. Let's see, early 1800s, when the British Empire is really starting to take over the world. All of a sudden, and then especially then in the early 1900s, after World War I, and the British Empire takes over the map of what we call Turkey and the Middle East, all of these Europeans start digging in Turkey and the Middle East, and it's the era of archaeology, at least in the modern West. And so what they start digging up in what we today call Iraq and Iran and Syria is the documents and buildings of all these empires in the Bible. Thousands and thousands of these clay tablets are surfaced, written in a script that it's so many cool stories, actually. It gets deciphered, and this one guy, George Smith, digs one up, and it's what today we call the Epic of Gilgamesh, and he's reading the flood story about a guy named Utnapishtim who survives on a boat with some animals that he built because the gods told him to build a boat, because one of the gods is angry because humans smell bad and they're too noisy, and so they send a flood, and thus begins. Here you go. And so one of these tablets that was discovered and has gotten a lot of press is called the Sumerian King List. And it's a story that tells the origins of kingship in the first city that the gods grant to the first human. And then there are 10 generations. In the 7th generation of these kings, something special happens, and then the 10th generation, Ziusudra, is the one who will be picked to survive through the flood, and so on.
Whoa.
So that's interesting. When all of these tablets of the Sumerian King List are compared with each other, however, the dates of the reigns of these pre-flood kings all varies, anywhere from 67,000 years to 28,000 years, number 72 to 36. So these are variants in the tradition, as this is over a millennium that these traditions are getting passed down. So something that's interesting, this 7th king, Enmedaranki, he's really special. He is king in the city of Sippar, which is a city dedicated to Shamash, which is the Semitic word sun. And Shamash in Epibara appointed King Edumuranki, who's the 7th. He's the beloved of Anu, beloved of the gods. And Enlil, these are all gods. And so here's what Shamash, the sun god, and Adad, the storm god, did to this 7th in the king. They brought him up into the divine assembly. They honored him. They set him on a large throne of gold and gave him the tablet of the gods, a secret of heaven and the underworld. And Enmedaranki is the learned sage who then comes back down to earth, and he brings the knowledge of the gods for metallurgy and for divination and astrology. He becomes the originator of civilization, just like Lamech, the 7th from Adam in Cain's line, is the father of the 3 sons that are are you with me? But then, so it's as if, so think of our Genesis 4 and 5. You have the 7th, Lamech, he's the father of all these originators of civilization. But then also remember, who was the 7th in line through Seth? Enoch. You know what's really interesting about Enoch? There's a number of things that are really interesting about Enoch. Do you know how long he lives? 365. Yeah, he lives 300 years, has some kids, then 65 more. He lives exactly the number of years of a solar cycle, a solar year. That's interesting. You're just like, wow, that's interesting. You know, what's also interesting is that he's the youngest of this whole crew. And actually, the two oldest are the ones precisely on the other side of him, right? Methuselah is above him. He's the oldest, 962. And then after him is Lamech, who is, Methuselah is 969. Wait, that comes after him. Yeah. So who comes before Enoch is his dad, Yered, who is 800. Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, 962. Methuselah is 969. And then right in the middle of the longest is the shortest, who lives exactly the same number of years as the solar calendar. And he's, right? He's the seventh. And something's happening here. It's as if we're meeting the Israelite in Meduranki. But here's the thing: is that Enmeduranki was beloved of the gods, and he became the bridge of heaven and earth. Yeah, and he's the one who actually gave all the secrets of sorcery and divination and metallurgy that will go on to become Babylon in the Sumerian version. In the biblical version, think about Enoch. Does he come back? No. What does he do?
He walks with God.
He walks with God.
And he gets taken.
And he's taken. And he was not, for God took him. Now, can you think of anyone else who was ever taken from the realm of mortality and transported into the realm of life?
Elijah.
Oh, Elijah. Sorry, I was thinking in the story so far.
Abel. No.
Adam.
Oh, Adam.
Adam.
That's what I said.
Yeah. Oh, you did earlier?
No, I was just playing.
Yeah. You remember that little line we looked at? Here, let's go back to it. Genesis 2, verse 7. Yahweh Elohim formed Adam and breathed it into his nostrils. Then he planted the garden. There he placed the human who he had formed. That's placing number one. Do you remember? It's two mentions of the placing. Yahweh Elohim took the human from the dust land and deposited him in the realm where he had the potential access to eternal life. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. So Enoch, he goes to Paradisos. Yeah, God took him. He demonstrated through his whole life he's somebody who wants to nothing more than to take those strolls with God, and God honors his request. So he is taken. He's taken. So think for the biblical author, there's this story about Enmeduranki, who's like the chief king and so on. But in the biblical value set, the one whom God loves isn't necessarily the powerful king. It's just the one who faithfully strolls with him. Do you get this here? This is so cool. Yeah. Okay. And so that's one piece of what's happening here. So remember, let's go back here. So that's Enoch. But then Noach. Noach is like his great-grandfather Enoch in one really important sense. Do you remember when Noah is introduced to us? We're told that he's righteous, he's blameless, Genesis 6, verse 9, and he walks about. He walks about with God. So it's like somehow in this lineage, it's just this lineage that keeps the hope alive. It's this hope for rescue, for return to Eden, for humanity. It's the seed of the woman that keeps hope alive. Yeah. So this is so fascinating. It's like the biblical author is working. This is the way that we tell the story of where we all came from. And the biblical author it's not that he's adapting or borrowing. It's his social environment. These are the stories that we tell. But at every point, he tells the story in such a way as to subvert the dominant Babylonian narrative and to bring the Yahweh, right, love God, love your neighbor worldview to light here. I mean, how is that not what's happening here? Now, it raises all kinds of other questions, too, right? But that, at least, this was like one of those, like, oh, that makes so much sense. Notice, in comparison, the number of years looked really diminished, first of all. And then second of all, in the copy and paste formula of all of these genealogies in Genesis 5, every single one ends with, and he died. It's like a drum beat. And he died. And he died. And so every one of those is just like, yeah.
Where the Sumerian king list doesn't end with, and he died.
At least not in terms of a literary form, that it just keeps repeating it in the same way. Yeah, correct. So, genealogies had a different function. Say it this way. Genealogies have different functions in different cultures. For many cultures, well, maybe I'll give my cultural conception. My cultural conception is my wife's mom gave us this binder, this binder of all the research she's done, the genealogy binder. It's unbelievable. And now you can go onto websites and do this kind of thing. There's more than just chronicle keeping happening there. It's about identity formation. Knowing your lineage and knowing the stories of your line plays an important role in my conception of myself and who I am. And I'll just speak from my own experience. If that's true for me, who's grown up in this, my parents moved from there, everybody's all mobile and dislocated, and I've never actually really even worked through the binder because it's actually kind of screwed up. But it's like I have to work up the motivation to do it. And that's so weird in light of most of human history where your identity is your. So that's one. And then the second, the function of numbers and of ages in ancient Near Eastern genealogies is just different than our conception. So the fact that Enoch's age reflects the number of the solar year, and where we're doing an elbow jab at Enmedaranki, who is the king of Sun City. There's a thing here, yeah. And so I think we have to say, before I impose my expectation of what these genealogies are, and then evaluate them as, well, that's like, whatever, playing fast and loose, or that's bad history. And I think we just have to humble ourselves and say, like, why does my conception of a genealogy have to... They clearly care about knowing where they come from, but for them, these genealogies are doing theology and identity formation at the same time. And so people have interpreted just this data in different ways, but you can't ignore it. You have to factor it in to how you see the biblical authors doing history and working with their sources. Let me pause for, I guess, question or reflection on that point. Then we're going to come back to Noah's birth name for a conclusion. But questions or thoughts about anything on the table so far?
About the numbers, I've just maybe a side comparison. Within Chinese culture, there's a lot of reverence for those who came before. And so this is usually most prominent in Chinese art. So within traditional art that we've had, usually ink prints and ink drawings, you very rarely see your ancestors depicted. That's why it's very odd for us to go into the Louvre and see, like, wow, you're drawing your like great-grandpa and all your kings and all your people.
Yeah.
You have portraits. There's no such concept of a portrait because you do not want to limit your ancestor or diminish your ancestor to one form. And so what you'll see in a lot of these landscape paintings is tiny little humans like on the edge of a hill or on a bridge, and usually their backs, you don't really see them. So there's this distance that the artists create to elicit this sense of awe or reverence for those who came before. And I feel like maybe that's potentially what's going on with the numbers, and having these people live much longer than we did. I don't know that like the human lifespan has actually, been that long ever, but it creates a sense of, I think, awe and maybe reverence, and the sense of like, oh, they are of ancient
times,
Yeah.
proximity to Eden.
Yes, that too.
The thing is, the ages don't diminish.
Right.
That explanation would work best if the numbers were all descending, getting shorter, which doesn't happen. So I think probably, I tend to think you're correct, that it's a literary device to indicate the honored position of these characters in our family history, in the family quilt, so to speak.
So Adam finally dies
Yes.
after being exiled. So how would you, okay, that's just an observation, but also to a question that I personally have, but I'm thinking that others might have too. If Adam is a representative or like a figurehead or just a metaphorical person, how would you explain to somebody who says, well, genealogy is like a figurative person wouldn't have kids that other people might trace back to, like Jesus, right? Like Adam is in Jesus' lineage.
Yep.
So what does that mean?
Yep.
How would
Yep.
you respond to that?
Yes. I will respond by saying we're going to take up that question directly in the next
say
session.
no more. Okay.
Yeah, more. I'm trying to tee it up, which is why you're asking it, because it's the next question to ask. So let's talk about that in the next session. As far as this comparative analysis with Mesopotamian sources, or this idea of the genealogy has become a vehicle for the theological message of the author. You see, he's using it not just to give us interesting information about the past. Clearly, this author doesn't tell us anything that they don't want to, because they often give us very little. So the fact that they would pack this thing full of this much info and this much cross-connection, it's a vehicle of the message, just as much as it's record-keeping. And the question is it one more than another? And people disagree on those things. But that's a really interesting perspective. My experience in biblical scholarship has been that it's really just in the last generation. My generation is a new wave of biblical scholars who are from really diverse cultural origins. And it's just a fact, like most Western institutions, the commentary writing business on the Bible has mostly been, privileged white European American males. And so that's tended to shape the perception about things like genealogies even in the Bible. And so I'm excited for another generation from now when the Bible dictionaries and commentaries will be able to reflect, I think, a more well-rounded, especially on something like the genealogies. It's good. Any other thoughts or reflections?
Yeah, it is interesting to hear to just the length of time that Adam lives and just how far that is removed from the day in which he eats of the fruit, which we mentioned earlier. But yeah, it takes a while. I mean, it goes several chapters, and then then eventually he lives 930 years, a little short of 1,000, to before he actually dies. And it's this interesting thing of like, it seems, and I know there's been all different kind of ways that people have interpreted or try to understand how that's connected. But it is just interesting to see the kind of like that it's almost like that like they're trying as much as possible to go beyond what has been kind of set, but at the end of the day, like death catches up.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter to everybody, and it's this thing of like where you're like, oh, like I want to live these 900 years, but then they died, and it's like death just like has the final word every single time, and it's just like, and it's unclear whether a day is you know a day or like a you know like with God a day is like 1,000 years or something. But either way.
Yeah.
Like death
Yeah.
always kind of like catches up, and it's
Yeah.
just this. That's what you're saying about the drum beat. It's like it's this hope of like we could live a long time is like matched by this finality of death at every turn. And when you read it out loud, if it's ever done, it just that really kind of hits you when you just read it.
And he died.
And he died. And you read it along the years, and he died. And
right.
I don't know if there's any other genealogies that mention their deaths every single time.
No, no. In fact, there's a couple other genealogies in Genesis 1 to 11 that match the copy and paste form of Genesis 5, but what they lack is the "and he died" formula. So notice, but just as repeated is the birth, and that's blessing. So blessing and curse are following all the way through. Just to draw your attention, there is a little chart in the notes that I adapted from a chart in another resource I found. But by the numbers given, most of these people were overlapping with each other. In fact, the date, Methuselah's age, goes precisely up to the day of the flood. And then, man, on the other side...
That would be bummer to be the oldest living dude and get...
It's really interesting. And then on the other side of the flood, Shem is actually still alive, technically, during the time of Abraham and Isaac. In fact, there's ancient Jewish tradition that Isaac went to Torah school with Shem, at the school of Shem. So it creates an interesting picture here, where anyhow.
It just seems like the numbers are too precise to not be saying something.
Yep.
If at very least,
Yeah.
they actually did live this long.
Yeah.
But it seems like
Yeah.
with Enoch,
With Enoch, or how
There's
long does
something-
Lamech live?
777. Like, it's got to mean something.
Because what is
can't
his
be-
count? What is his alternate personality?
Right.
The 77 times
Yeah.
of vengeance.
Totally.
So
These can't be accidental,
Totally.
and it
That's
can't.
right.
To me, it just seems
yeah,
strange that it would just be a record of old dudes.
I hear that. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, and people have the number of interpretations.
Yeah.
It's ingenious and very many. So I'm content to see that there's clearly some symbolic meaning in Enoch and Lamech. There's something significant about Methuselah going up to the flood, but with the others, it's just I don't know. Life's too short. Let me conclude this just with a short survey of Noah's naming scene. I remember I said it's like the roundabout, the naming of Noah. So every line of this, Noach's name, you may or may not remember this, but the second time Yahweh puts Adam in Eden, it was the word rest, Noah's name. He knowed him in the garden. Now here's somebody named Rest. And he's going to give us Nacham, comfort, relief, from the work and the itzabon of the Adamah. It's all of this, a human in the garden. The ground has been cursed. Humanity is now exiled in the garden. All of this tees Noah up to be the hoped-for seed who will deliver us from the curse. And so think all the way back. This is from the first couple sessions to how Genesis 1 through 11 works together as a whole. From one sacred high place, exiled, two lines separate. One line leads to the city of blood. One line leads to the ark that survives the flood because of the outcry against the city of blood. It's a new Eden, little floating Eden with Noah. Rest, comfort man with the animals, safely deposited on top of a new sacred high place where he offers a sacrifice. And God says, you know what I'm never going to do again? Curse the ground. Meaning what? I will never strike all life again as I have done. Creation will now become a stable environment where somehow God will bring about that promised seed who will crush the head of the snake. So Noah he becomes a focus point, a new human figure through the story. So in a way, it's as if the whole story of the Bible is kind of foreshadowed from the story from Adam to Noah, right? Just insert from Adam to the last Adam, Jesus Messiah, who goes up to the high place to offer himself as an offering for the sins of his own family and for all humanity. And he brings comfort and rest and a new covenant. A new covenant, yeah? What do you do with literature like this except just like read it, ponder it, let it bring you to your knees, right? In humility and worship. What an incredible story. I do want to honor the fact that there are outstanding questions that I have intentionally delayed till the very end. So we'll take those up in the next session. But for now, let's take a break.
Okay, so we've been through the whole text now. What will remain are some questions. Obviously, there's questions remaining in that. But in the 15 minutes we have, if you have anything that came to your mind, questions, comments, remarks, anything, and then we'll kind of talk about the questions. So what does this have to do, Genesis 2 through 5, with us? And we're about to walk out this door and continue into the world living out the mission of God, living out what God's up to in this world. So anyway, questions, comments, anything coming to mind as he was doing that?
I don't think I had ever realized or thought about the fact that after the flood, the ground was no longer cursed.
Yeah. Yeah, the curse was gone. And God had specifically said the ground is cursed to Adam. And now he says the ground is no longer cursed. Yeah. Through what had happened there. That's a lot to think about. Because the ground, creation, and Paul definitely has a theology that creation is struggling, all of creation is groaning and struggling, waiting to be fulfilled. So, yeah. But the ground's not cursed. So, in that language, yeah, good point. Anything else in all that? And if you ever get a chance in your lifetime, go to the British Museum in London. You'll have to buy a week-long pass. Sorry. It's 200 times bigger than this building. And you can walk through the gates of Nineveh. They've dug them up. You can walk the ancient world. You can see all these tablets. You can see the British. A lot of people have said the British stole them and all that stuff. But man, it is jaw-dropping to watch all of these, see all of these things. But it really, it's a fascinating story to go back and, when the British took the Middle East, basically in World War I, lots of people wanted to know what was under those sands, under that ground. And they began digging, and they funded a lot of archaeology. And that's why, something like this can go on, because we understand the ancient world a lot more. I'm sure we don't understand the ancient world near as much as maybe sometimes we think we do, but we understand the ancient world and their language and the way they viewed the world. And yeah, we just have in front of us, a story that has so many similarities to other ancient cultures. Yeah.
But I had never heard about the genealogy
And here's, thank you for bringing that up. And what Betty said was, she said, I've heard that there's flood stories in other ancient cultures, haven't heard how the genealogies match and all these kinds of things. So here's where we get to us today. Here we have a story that's embedded in a world of stories. Okay? That grows out of a world of stories, of people living their lives based on their worldview, based on, and man, one of the things that you'll find in these ancient stories, whether or not you look at the clay tablets or not that they're written on and all that in the British Museum, these stories, the gods are vicious. They just really don't like humans very much. They don't, they have a mood one day to feed or send rain, and they don't have a mood another day to do it. Or they get mad and they pout and all that. Okay, so it's just a wrong view of God. It's just a wrong view. What is the most important thing that this story says into that world? Yahweh's not like that. The God who created this world is not like that. Yeah.
There are other gods, earthly gods.
Yeah.
Ancient people had them, people after them, and people today and everything.
Yeah.
There's only one living God that's alive and well, and provides rain and sunshine and everything else we need.
Yeah.
He gives us what we need when we need it.
Yeah.
And we ask him for it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are other things we want or we ask him for that he don't give that do us more harm than good.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. And so today, are there any other competing stories going on in our world? And are there competing ideas about who this God is and what he's up to in this world? Yes, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. We even have some of them locked in our own brain, in our mind, in our heart. And we continually discover and get to know this God in new ways because he has just thrown open himself to humanity, and said, know me. I want to live with you. I want to live in you and with you and those things. And lots of people don't have that view of God. And so they live their lives, they look at their life and their situation and what's happened to them through the lens of that, whatever view of God that they have. Okay? And so the church's mission, is to make him known. That's his mission. He's making himself known. And so, yeah, we're in a world of mighty kings who get to walk with gods. We show how a Nazarene peasant carpenter walks among. That's one way to say it. That's one way. Maybe a rough way to say it, but that's one way to say it. And that's the one.
I keep thinking that when getting that right worldview of God gets really important as you go through life, because there are times that things do not turn out the way you want them to. And if you don't have a view of God, of the loving God, you could get really angry at the way things turn out.
Yeah.
Instead of not being angry.
Yes.
And I think it comes from people not understanding it. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It means everything to see visibly an accurate picture of God. And fortunately, we have a human who, wasn't that a smart thing? For God to become a human and to show us what that was like. Now, even in his world, we've got to go in and look at his world and hear what he's saying in his world. You know, man, this Sunday we're going to go to the part of the Sermon on the Mount. Do not think is how he starts. Do not think. After he says the Beatitudes and he says, you are salt and you are light. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law. Why that sentence? I've been doing a lot of reflecting and thinking about just that sentence for the last few weeks. Because he's entering a world that everybody out there, when he's proclaiming, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, is he saying the law's going away? They only knew how to construct a picture of God within law. And the only thing they could see law worked out in is the group of people called the Pharisees and the temple. You know. And so it's important for Jesus to say first, what? I'm not talking about getting rid of that. I'm not talking about abolishing the law. In fact, it has to be finished. Everything has to be done. Everything has to be finished. And so he's going to say that. But you're also going to need to rethink. You're going to rethink murder. And you're going to need to rethink sex. And you're going to need to rethink divorce. And you're going to need to Jesus is going to go through that part of the sermon. But anyway, so that's what he's doing too. Is because just like the ancient world got a set of thoughts and beliefs and worldviews about gods and about living and about all these things as they were discovering the world, as they were discovering, metal, bronze, iron, music, they're doing all these things and they're discovering it. They're developing views about God. And Genesis comes in and says, let me tell you the real story. You're going to recognize a lot of it. You're going to hear a whiff of everything that you live in every day, You're going to hear those things, but you're going to hear something very different. Because actually this God is very different than you think. And so I think that's a big thing. And so everywhere we go as a church, missionally, we have got to at times crash into people's views of God, at times instruct and change and teach people's view of God, and all the time show because we can now. We couldn't with some stone tablets. All we could do is say, don't do this and don't do that. That's what I do. It's on my fridge. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. But a lot of times the church and Christians, we've settled for the list on the fridge and said, don't do this and don't do that and don't do this and don't do that. Right? Because that's easier than living in a broken world. It's not going to be easier than living in a remade world. One day we're not going to have to live in a broken world. We're going to live in a remade world. I promise you things are going to be so much easier. But we're like, it's right now, it's like we're on the front lines of the war all the time. That's not the funnest and best life. You got to live a certain way. You got to survive a certain way. You got to think a certain way when you're living there with the bullets flying and the bombs falling and all those kinds of things. And in a sense, that's kind of where we are. We're living like that, and I don't mean that in the sense that we're firing, but I don't mean it in that sense. So that's not a very good illustration in a lot of ways. But it is kind of the difference between us sitting here and us sitting in a battle tonight. In the new creation, it's going to be more like sitting here than that. Yeah. But man, we've got to, Jesus, what's it look like to live here in this battle? Well, let me show you. And he hangs on a cross. That's what, I'm sorry, that's the only thing that's going to fix a broken world. So we got to prepare to live like that and prepare to do that. And be transformed, make the law what it was always intended to be, something that's so deeply embedded in us that nobody can be seen the same. Nobody. Those people that bump up against us and are in opposition to what we want today, so we get angry, it's going to change how that happens and interacts, Jesus said. You all are concerned about murder, but I tell you, don't be angry. You know, man, anger's going to happen, and then what are we going to do in that moment? You know, and he goes on and on and on. So anyway, questions, comments. It's time for us to go. But anything else? I think the most important thing about the mission of God is that we are showing off God in a world that has so many competing stories. And we're living in a tough time because competing stories can shoot across the world in seconds. Now, can you? Yeah, Mark.
Going back to the Sermon on the Mount, this section we're about to go into, it's interesting that Jesus says, you have heard what it was said.
Yeah.
But I tell you. And you've heard, you've got these stories that you've been told.
Yeah.
And you assume, do not murder. Check. Haven't done that.
Yeah.
Pretty good guy. But I tell you, there's another story coming, and it's going to blow your mind.
This is that fresh new world
Yes.
that I'm announcing. There is a world where this happens, and there is a world where this happens, and there's a world where...
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're seeing here in Genesis.
Yeah.
You've heard that was said. The Samaritans are saying this.
Yeah.
This is a story. But let me tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the real guidance.
Yeah. And there is that sense, when you said that, it reminded me what he was talking about. This scene in Eden of, you get the idea that God and Adam and Eve walked together, and then Enoch walks with God, and then Noah walks with God. There's something there, and that these people that start these lines of, and one other thing, let me mention. Have we noticed here that there just seems to be, there's two lines that go. There's two lines. There's the line of Cain compared to the line of Seth. And then there's the genealogy of the 10 kings that came from Seth. And, from Cain. And, I'm sorry, it was Seth. But that's a theme that's going to happen all through the Bible. The Israelites looked at that and they said, that's a really good way to talk about wisdom. You have a choice. And that's all been from the first page of the Bible. You have a choice. You can eat from the tree of life. You can eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so the way it's personified in Proverbs is you've got Lady Wisdom standing by her house saying, come. There's some beautiful things here. And you got this prostitute-y looking lady who says, come on over here. This is good. Don't worry about going to buy food. We stole it. It's here. It's good. And they got these pictures. And then Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, it's a wisdom sermon. It's a sermon based on the wisdom of Israel. Because what's in Proverbs, it's the wise and the foolish. Anything in Sermon on the Mount talk about the wise and the foolish. Yeah, we know that part. And Jesus offers a choice. He says, if you build on the foundation, you got a great house. Storms are going to come. It's okay. If you build on foolishness. And he defines wisdom and foolishness. Whoever hears these words of mine and what? Puts them into practice. Who lives this way? You're on a path. You're on a path. You're building a house on a rock, on a big stone foundation. Yeah.
Well, even Jesus reiterates the narrow path
Yeah.
and the wide path.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in there too.
It's the same
Yeah.
concept as what's in Genesis. There are some who walked the path with God,
Yeah.
and all those many others who did not.
Yeah.
They could go away.
And the force of what he's saying in the Beatitudes, here's what I think, and I hope I said it close to this in the sermons that I preached. I heard it in Mark Sunday. I heard Mark saying it Sunday. Is that what he did at the beginning of that sermon, which is so brilliant and so needed. When I walk to a person who's made stupid and foolish choices, when I walk to them, the first thing they need to hear is hope. I don't stop there. That's a problem with a lot of American problem solving. Oh, they're there. It's okay. It doesn't matter. You know, Jesus comes and says, welcome to everyone. Let's widen out the welcome. Everyone, this is possible for you. And you are welcome. But you're going to have to come down this path if you want to find this. And if you go down that path, you'll find that. But you are most welcome. You're most welcome. And it seems to me that a lot of the reputation of religion, and maybe we need to do some thinking and studying about, is that real or is that kind of made up? Or can we find places in our life, and can we find places in our church life where we say, well, you'll be welcome if. You're most welcome if. And no, I don't think people like you are welcome. I don't think so. I'm just not sure about that. Can we live out the Beatitudes of saying, you are most welcome. This is the path that leads to life. And you get to choose. Yeah, you get to choose that. So I think that's what Jesus is saying. And that's kind of the difference between our culture and what we ought to be. Okay, what we ought to be and live in. All right, let's go. That's 5 after.